we and many others have deep concerns about some of the provocative actions that China's taken in recent years, going back to 2016. And the reason that this is a concern for so many countries, not just the United States, is that were there to be a crisis over Taiwan, the likelihood is that that would produce an economic crisis that could affect quite literally the entire world. 50% of commercial container traffic goes through the Taiwan Strait every day. 70% of semiconductors are manufactured on Taiwan. If, as a result of a crisis, that was taken offline, it would have dramatic consequences for virtually every country around the world, which is, again, why there's been rising concern about some of the provocative actions that China's taken. I also made that very clear. President Biden believes strongly that one of the successful aspects of our relationship with China going back 5 decades has been the responsible management of the Taiwan question. We continue to believe that that's essential.
North Korea called its failed spy satellite launch last month the, quote, gravest failure at a key party meeting over the weekend, state media reported on Monday. The rocket plunged into the sea on May 31st due to engine failure, Pyongyang said at the time, in an unusually candid admission by the isolated state of a technical problem. State media said those in charge of the launch were, quote, heavily criticized at the weekend's meeting, and that they were ordered to further analyze the failure and prepare for another launch in the near future. The North also renewed its vow to build its nuclear capability and strengthen ties with other countries that oppose what it called the, quote, U.S. strategy for world supremacy. Earlier this year, South Korea said there were signs of food shortages in the North that it, quote, seemed to have deteriorated. And the weekend meeting also reportedly touched on securing self-sufficiency in food. Many countries, including the U.S., have imposed strict sanctions on the isolated country over its weapons programs. Those sanctions, combined with self-imposed border lockdowns over the past several years, have strained the North's economy. Diplomatic efforts to ease tensions or persuade Pyongyang to abandon its nuclear arsenal have been stalled.
Good afternoon. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with China's President Xi Jinping on Monday in Beijing, ending a rare and closely watched trip and part of an increasing diplomatic push by the Biden administration to engage with China over their many disputes, from human rights to espionage, the war in Ukraine, Taiwan, and more. Xi is hailing what he called progress in the talks, though it's not clear exactly what progress was made. This was Blinken after the roughly half-hour meeting.
The reason that this is a concern for so many countries, not just the United States, is that were there to be a crisis over Taiwan, the likelihood is that that would produce an economic crisis that could affect quite literally the entire world. 50% of commercial container traffic goes through the Taiwan Strait every day. 70% of semiconductors are manufactured on Taiwan. If, as a result of a crisis, that was taken offline, it would have dramatic consequences for virtually every country around the world.
The optics of the meeting did appear positive, however. The venue was Beijing's Great Hall of the People, which is usually used for heads of state. Blinken also called the meetings candid and constructive.
Israeli commandos backed by helicopter gunships killed at least 5 Palestinians, including a teenager, during an unusually fierce clash in the occupied West Bank on Monday. These Palestinian journalists were caught in the crossfire but later evacuated by ambulance. One was shot in the waist. Troops raided the flashpoint town of Jenin to arrest Palestinians suspected of attacks and came under fire from gunmen, Israel's military said. Video obtained by Reuters shows an explosion enveloping an armoured troop transport as shots ring out. At least 7 Israeli military personnel were wounded. In a rare strike by helicopter that showed the severity of the fighting, an Apache fired on an open area to drive back gunmen, a military spokesperson said, as casualties were brought out of the troop transport. Under heavy fire, the army was forced to mount an extraction mission to pull out a number of its vehicles trapped in the fighting. The Palestinian Health Ministry said at least 66 Palestinians were wounded in the clashes. Yusuf Saka's 15-year-old son Ahmed was killed.
He was decent, polite and respectful, but his problem was that the moment the army raided, he ran towards them. He wanted to after his friend Omar was killed. The death of his friend Omar was very painful for him.
At least 2 of the dead belong to Islamic Jihad. The armed group said Israel's use of aircraft, quote, will push our fighters to use tools that will surprise the enemy. Hamas said its fighters also took part in the clashes, and an official from the Fatah party said fighters from nearby cities had arrived in Jenin to support the local gunmen. Jenin and other areas of the northern West Bank have been a focus of months of stepped-up raids by Israel amid a spate of Palestinian street attacks in its cities.
Airbus, Boeing and other big names have gathered for the Paris Air Show. French President Emmanuel Macron was there to open the industry's biggest event of the year. It all comes amid optimism over a rebound in business. And it began with a record order, India's Indigo announcing it will take 500 new Airbus planes. Local rival Air India may also confirm a mammoth order. In all, some forecasts predict deals for around 2,000 new jets during the week. Analysts say many airlines are catching up after putting all planning on hold during the global health crisis. Arguments over climate change could prove a mixed blessing. Concern over emissions pushes airlines to order newer, more fuel-efficient jets. But longer term, environment activists argue that the only way to really tackle emissions will be to drastically reduce flying. The conflict in Ukraine has increased the focus on the defence side of the show too. Sash Tusa is an aerospace analyst at Agency Partners.
We should expect to see many hundreds of aircraft ordered this week. But what's changed has been the importance of defence. Defence has come back as a consequence of the war in Ukraine, and announcements about defence and companies presenting the equipment that they have for the defence market, they're on the front foot now in a way that they haven't been for 2 decades or more.
Right now, the conflict has boosted aerospace firms as Western governments ramp up spending on new gear. That's putting a focus on drones and other new tech weapons. But some analysts wonder whether budgets will be enough to simultaneously restock munitions and develop expensive new systems such as fighter jets.